Next up, we have Philipp Langer, who is Principal Software Architect and General Manager at Eclipse Source in Austria. He's very, very passionate about the Eclipse ecosystem, of course. He's working recently on web and cloud-based tool development. In his daily work, he supports organizations in building web-based domain-specific modeling and engineering tools, including graphical modeling editors, model diff merge with Git, and much more. So I'll hand it over to Philip.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yeah, welcome everyone to this talk on leveraging Theia's customizability for creating domain-specific tools. I have to say I really enjoyed the conference so far. There has been many talks on Theia, giving a great overview of what it is and also highlighting several different topics and aspects of it. So what I would like to do in this talk is actually picking up on one of the aspects that Brian mentioned in the introduction today, which is Theia's customizability, and especially its flexibility to also handle use cases that go beyond typical IDE use cases, more into the direction of domain-specific tools and which aspects of Theia actually make that possible. So what looking back at the last few years where we worked on several different Theia projects together with our customers, we kind of faced a very different types of tools that they were building based on Theia. So if you want to categorize them, and please, this is not a very hard categorization. So of course there are overlaps and mixtures of these categorizations, but just to put it into some sort of boxes, I would say one very obvious type of application that is built with Theia is the types of custom IDEs. So basically, these are generic IDEs which have additional or a set of specified language supports in addition to the generic IDE functionality. Maybe they have some sort of additional compilers already included, and maybe they talk to a special service. But in general, the purpose of those tools is programming and generic IDE functionality. If you go to a little bit to the right, you're getting more domain-specific maybe. So those are the types of tools that are, I would call them specialized tools. So they still have IDE-like features and they have programming in their focus, but they are really optimized for a specialized set of languages and a specialized set of methodologies and workflows. So that means they typically don't have these very generic IDE functionalities that you add plugins, let the users add plugins and stuff like that, but really focus on guiding the users through a specific workflow and letting the user, for instance, open a project from a predefined location, from a device or something like that, then do the job of doing some changes and then pushing, for instance, the changes back to the device or some service. So those are already way more specialized as the custom IDs, for instance. Going even further, we go away from the typical IDE programming use cases. We go more into the direction of domain-specific tools. One example of that is the category of configurators, essentially. So here, programming is not in the focus. It's rather dealing with probably complex domain models, which are then edited typically through tables, form-based UIs, and stuff like that. So they are not like really IDEs anymore, but really flexible applications to deal with a complex domain model and configure, for instance, certain, I don't know, machines through to insurance policies and stuff like that. And last but not least, there is, of course, also modeling tools, which not only have the domain model, but really a domain modeling language attached. So those tools then typically also have graphical editors combined with form-based, text-based, and stuff like that. And they're really focused on a specific modeling language or a set of modeling languages. So of course, all these different tools, they have pretty different requirements and pretty different paradigms. But the really cool thing that we have observed in the last few years is that you can use Theia as a very versatile tool platform to build all of these tools very efficiently and very flexibly. And I think this is really one of the key unique selling propositions of Theia, especially when you compare it, for instance, to VS Code. So VS Code, don't get me wrong, I really love VS Code. I use it every day. Is really basically an extensible code editor, and that's what I also love about VS Code. But that means it is essentially a code editor that can be extended with VS Code extensions to add, for instance, additional language support, to add additional debuggers and stuff like that via a predefined extension points and APIs. Theia, however, is really in its heart and its in its concepts, and I think Thomas outlined that perfectly in the last talk, a platform for building custom tools. So that means it's really open for customization, and virtually anything can be changed to the specific requirements of a application that is built on Theia. The nice and great thing about Theia as well is, of course, that it also supports VS Code extensions. So it can be essentially both. It can be an extensible editor, but it can even be then customized towards a specific application domain. So what I would like to do in this talk is basically discuss a few of these typical customization use cases that, in my opinion, are key success factors for achieving basically great tools that fall into any of those categories or any of those use cases and scenarios. So one of the first aspects that is typically very, very important, of course, when you look at configurators and modeling tools, for instance, but also to some degree for specialized tools, is to have full control over the user interface and being able to start from a very clean user interface. So what I mean by that is when you take basically Theia and build, so remove every dependency that might be in there, but really build the minimal Theia application that actually runs, then you will end up with a package JSON that looks something like this. So it just includes Theia core and Theia preferences. You can build that and open it up. Then you will basically see something like this. That's great. It's not crowded or anything. However, it has already some taste of IDE with it, right? So you have a file explorer here on the left. You have a problems view, an outline view. So those are typical things that are already associated with the type of application that an IDE is. Also, there is a lot of things that come from the code editor dependency that is pulled in automatically, essentially, which is, for instance, the toggle word wrap, toggle minimap, and so on. The whole selection menu that you see up here, as well as the Go menu item here. So that's just coming in without you having explicitly added a dependency. However, this doesn't mean that you have to stick with this as an application base frame, because Theia as an extensible platform provides a so-called contribution point named filter contribution. And I'm very thankful for Thomas for introducing the whole extension mechanism that Theia provides on the dependency injection level, because I'm using this now in this slide. But you don't have to understand it in detail. I think what's most important to understand when looking at this code is that the upper area here is really just registration of your customizing code. So basically, we customize here or basically specify here a sample filter that we want to implement and want to hook it up as a filter contribution to Theia. And this lower part here is then your actual customization code that is being executed. And in this particular instance, what we do here is we register filters. And this API allows you to list a set of contribution points that you want to filter from, and specify essentially a function that will be executed to filter the contributions other extensions have done for these contribution points. So in this particular instance, we want to remove all commands, all menu contributions, and so on, that basically have the file navigator contribution in their constructor name. The same we do down here, where we basically remove from the widget factory. That's an extension point where you can register factories that create widgets, as the name implies. We remove all of those that are either files or Explorer view container. And what you, when you continue to do that, also for problems view, code editor, terminal, and outline view, then what you will then be able to obtain is essentially from the original application that I've just shown 2 slides ago, you will get this very, very clean application that really has no typical IDE components anymore. So you see that the selection menu and the go menu went away. There is no problems view anymore and stuff like that. But you can really only add the domain specific things that you want to really add. So that's very, very useful for especially those non-IDE based applications. So what else? Of course, that's you can remove stuff, but in order to get somewhere, you typically also need to add stuff. So what happens also quite often is that these applications want to add more than what Theia already out of the box provides to be added. So as also already mentioned, when you look at the structure of a Theia application, you have a main menu, for instance, and a context menu that you can contribute items to. You have a status bar where you can contribute items to. You have the quick command palette and stuff like that. And obviously, you can add views and editors to either of those areas that Theia provides. But of course, for certain use cases, you might want to add even structurally additional user interface elements, and you can actually do also that. So as an example, just for such an additional thing that you would like to add to the application frame, consider, for instance, a global toolbar. I do not want to start the discussion whether we should add a toolbar or not to Theia. I think that's a very opinionated discussion. I just say there is no generic toolbar in Theia right now. So obviously there are also no contribution points and no VS Code API anyway. But you could still, for your application, add that. And I think there is a very, very nice example in the Arduino IDE that is Theia based, where you can basically see how this is implemented. Essentially, the entry point for this implementation is the front-end application contribution, which is an API extension point from Theia, where you will be called on start of a front-end application, and you get the instance of the front-end application provided, which gives you access to the application shell, which is essentially everything. And then you can start adding or even changing widgets there, and then essentially add the global toolbar. And of course, then you can even add additional contribution points for other extensions to add to this toolbar as well. So that's really flexible. Another very, very typical use case that or a topic that we faced in customer projects with Theia is workspaces and projects. So that's a question that often arises. So Theia and VS Code, they follow the paradigm that a workspace is basically one or more root folders that you just add to your instance. So essentially, the file explorer would just show the contents plain of these one or more root folders. There is no notion of a project itself. However, some tools certainly require the notion of a project. There often the project is some sort of scope of a configuration, a concept for resolving dependencies and stuff like that within a workspace and so on. So there is good reasons why some applications need the notion of a project. Of course, in those applications, tool developers need to define what a project is, and then essentially you can say, okay, I have a notion of a project, but how do you actually reflect that now in Theia? So when you look at this example here from Eclipse, how this looks like, Eclipse has the notion of a project. You see that projects have a different icon, and you have even virtual nodes here and decorators and so on, stuff going on there as well. So how do you address those requirements in Theia? So what you can do, for instance, looking at the first three typical requirements, decorating the project in the Explorer, decorating project-specific folders, and show virtual nodes. This can be done pretty easily in Theia as well by, again, using one of the contribution points. In this case, we get the contribution point navigator tree decorator, and we add our custom decorator to it. And essentially all those registered decorators are then invoked one after the others, and each one can add their decoration. So that's nothing super special. Essentially, you then walk through the tree, and then you can ask if something is a project file node. then we want to add additional decorations like font data and caption suffixes, font color, and stuff like that. We just returned it, and that's basically what's needed. For adding virtual nodes, it's a little bit more involved. So just note here that we use Rebind. So that's also what Thomas already talked about before. So we take an existing implementation, in this case, the tree provider for the navigator, and we rebind it to our own implementation, which can, for instance, subclass the file navigator tree, and just as in this example here, extend it by adding additional nodes to the children if it is a project node. And here we just, for instance, create a library node that has some sort of type and a name, and we can assign icons and so on. So that's rather straightforward to do. However, of course, note that once you use Rebind, it's not composable anymore. If you have multiple extensions that do the same Rebind, obviously this won't work. But typically, you wouldn't need it in that case anyway. Right, so how does that look like? I have actually a live demo here to show you that. So basically in this Theia instance, I already applied those changes. And we have here 2 projects which are not decorated right now. So this is just a plain file structure. But as soon as I have, as soon as a folder contains a .project file, it would consider it as a project. So let me just rename that and remove this, and you see suddenly we get a new decoration, even a suffix here, and the .project file is styled differently, and the source file as well has some additional decorator and is underlined. Let's do the same here. So we get the same as well here. What about the virtual nodes? Let me just refresh this once, and now we see that the entire tree is refreshed. That's because I didn't actually change the folder. That's why I needed to manually refresh. But now we see that there is also these libraries shown here. Right. Of course, another very, very typical thing to do is to add custom views and editors. Obviously, this is something that you can do with Theia very well. You can also do that with VS Code. But in Theia, in particular, there is dedicated contribution points and base classes even to help you doing that quite efficiently. So there is widget factory, widget contribution, and widget open handler, which I don't go in too much detail. I rather would like to focus what makes the Theia's custom view and editor support so special, especially in contrast to VS Code, for instance. So first of all, Theia's custom view and editor support are true front-end extensions. So they are not operating in an iframe, but they're really part of the front end. That makes it much easier and more convenient to actually develop and debug for several reasons. I already mentioned that there are several base classes such as React widget and so on, which make it super simple to really just add a widget and implement that then based on React, or to add specific types of dialogues and stuff like that. And what's also super useful in many cases is that you can interact with all the other Theia front-end and back-end services just as any other Theia extension. So that's great. What's really then what this enables also is that we can have native context menus. That's something that would not be possible if we would just run in a separate application that is just embedded as an iframe. So with Theia views, you can actually have those native context menus and really have seamless integration. Another aspect here that I think is very unique is that we have a very flexible opener service in Theia. So that's something that we have used in projects quite a lot. So those allow that you have also custom opener options. So these are basically the additional context information that can be provided when your editor is opened. So you can either put them in opener options, or you can add them into the URIs. And you can also, even when you open it, have an extensible range object to indicate essentially additional context information when you open a view or an editor. And that additional context information is really super useful, especially if you have, for instance, problem views that you can directly also in a custom editor that is not text-based jump to a certain part where the problem actually occurs, or react differently when you, for instance, open a library from a project explorer that we've just added here in the customization. So this way you can really add additional information. So let me just demonstrate that on the example of a GLSP diagram editor. So just in case you don't know it, Eclipse GLSP stands for Graphical Language Server platform. It's essentially a framework for building diagram editors like the one you see here. But I don't want to focus too much on this part right now, but rather show what I mean with that it's great to add very well integrated custom editors. So obviously, when I open this file, we can open the diagram. That's great. It would behave just as any diagram editor. That's fine. But what I wanted to especially focus on is, for instance, that you have a native context menu like you see here. So this is essentially exactly the same native context menu that you would get when you right-click here, for instance. You can actually see it when I click here that it really overlaps the part where the widget is rendered. So that's something that's good to be capable of doing. Another aspect is that you can actually, what I mentioned before, have custom opener options and ranges. So when I just run, for instance, a validation, then you see that I get error markers and some information markers. They can also be then populated to the Theia problems view service. And what's really then special is that I can click on those and actually jump to the actual element. That of course also works when I just save that and click here again, even if the editor is closed. So it would just open it once and then just process further open options. That's something that is, for instance, very, very hard, if at all possible, with VS Code. Also, of course, this can be done in many, many different ways. So you could, for instance, also have commands that provide these different services, so just these different open options. So just as one example, we have here an example navigation command contribution, which is a plain Theia command contribution. And essentially it gets the opener service, which allows you to open editors and views. And what we essentially do is we call the open command from the opener service and provided the file URI, but in addition provide a sort of like a query as an additional open option. In this case, we want to select something that is called push. So when we run this action, I think it's called something with push. Yeah, push. Open example one task with push. So when I click on that and execute it, we actually run here, and the editor can process these open options and, for instance, resolve the query and directly jump to an element. So that's very, very useful, I think. All right. So that was basically the few key things that I wanted to mention about the Theia extensibility on the one hand side. So now I think what's also worth mentioning is that you have actually with when you build on Theia, not only this flexibility, but you have access to a very broad and innovative ecosystem. So I've already shown Eclipse GLSP for diagram editors, but there's much, much more. The whole Eclipse Cloud Dev Tools working group holds quite a lot of projects. Among them is, for instance, EMF Cloud, OpenVSX, and many, many more. And with the combination of those, that's actually something that is, I believe, very, very powerful, that you have the combination of this huge ecosystem plus the customizability so that you can really pick and choose and cater everything together as you need. So just to provide a few examples, I show a few things that are beyond basically the IDE use cases from the EMF Cloud project. So really quick, what is EMF Cloud? Essentially, it's an umbrella project that provides several different components for building Theia-based modeling tools or all kinds of tools that operate on some sort of domain model, and provides components for covering the most frequent use cases like loading models, showing them in a tree and stuff like that. One thing that it also provides is an architecture blueprint. which is essentially an example application that you can use to start from, and that demonstrates many of those components. So this example blueprint is available open source, essentially, and I think Vincent in his talk mentioned it yesterday as well, that it was very useful for him too, to get started into that direction. So check it out. It covers many, many different use cases, ranging from diagrams, as we've already seen before, but also forms and trees and stuff, many, many more. I will show a few of them in a second. So let's start with Form-based editor. So that's another example of a custom editor. Let me just quickly start the application. Wait for it to bring it up. Maybe I show you this in the meantime so that you see it, that it's actually starting. So what we see here in a second is this coffee editor, which is the blueprint of the EMF Cloud project. And we have here a custom file format, essentially a model, superbrewer3000.coffee. And as soon as I click on that, then we see that a form-based editor shows up, and it has all the functionalities that typical form-based editors have. So it shows the structure of the model in a tree editor. Of course, you can then add additional things like deep tray, which has again a control unit. And then you can navigate to a control unit and change all these different aspects of that a control unit might have. Like this. So when I save that, of course, this is then being processed and saved back to the file, as you can actually see by this modified flag here. Just, oops, sorry, need to reload the presentation mode. So that's how is this done? So this is done with the EMF Cloud component, the tree component, and the form is actually rendered with a project called JSON Forms, also open source, which allows you to basically define a JSON schema and a UI schema to describe how the form should look like, and it will then be rendered also, of course, within Theia. Another interesting thing is, of course, how then custom editors can communicate with each other. So just to show you an example, I can actually, going back to this now, actually also open a graphical model here. And in this graphical model, you see essentially an overlapping part of this application. As you can see here, there is a list of tasks, and that's the one exactly the same that we see here, but here in a graphical way. So when I add another task like this, you see that the new task just appeared here, and I can now rename that to enjoy, and you see it got immediately updated here as well. Enjoy a lot. We'll change it here again, and it will be again updated here as well. Basically, these two editors are linked because they operate on an overlapping model. So how does this work? Here also EMF Cloud provides a component for that, which is called the EMF Cloud Model Server. And the basic idea is that each different editor component that you can register as a custom editor within a Theia application has its own front-end server. So similar like GLSP and LSP, the language server protocol. There is also a JSON Forms server, which basically fuels the respective view in the respective representation, so form-based, graphical, textual, and so on. But they all can connect to a common model server, which essentially holds the manages the model state underneath. So when something changes, this will be reported to the model server, so that also the diagram editor will get notified to update, and vice versa. Good. One thing that is very, very cool, I think, also in the EMF Cloud project that I want to also show here, just a short disclaimer, this is really an alpha state component that has been very, very recently started, is support for comparison and versioning. So very often in these configuration and modeling tools, you have the problem that when something changes in the model, you want to be able to manage those changes in a way. So what you can do here, for instance, in this application is once you've changed it, and I just did that, so you see here the modified flags, you can actually compare it, for instance, to the head revision. So before I changed it, and this will open up a tree editor, which shows you all the different changes that have been applied. So for instance, I here added this enjoy a lot state, and I added the tip tray and stuff like that. You can even do that for the graphical diagram as well. So when I open that, you will see the left-hand side version and the right-hand side version and see exactly what changed, which is essentially the enjoy a lot task that I've added down here. So how is this provided by EMF Cloud Compare? Essentially, it uses in the backend EMF Compare, which is an existing Eclipse component for EMF models. And this will then run on a backend, which then can really do the heavy lifting in terms of model comparisons. What then has been done Theia specific is that we sort of add an endpoint in front of EMF Compare so that it can be invoked from Theia backend services, which then essentially provide the two versions and obtain from EMF Compare the respective differences that have been computed, which are then sent to the front end, and then there is a dedicated editor that actually processes this front end. Right. I think, well, let me just quickly check the time. So yeah, we've about 30 minutes. So I think a couple of more minutes I have left. So coming back from basically these very domain-specific tool configuration use cases, also to the custom IDE use cases, of course, what really is also a key success factor, I think, for specific Theia-based applications is that you can actually combine these two worlds of the IDE technologies that are basically available for Theia-based application via the VS Code extension mechanism that it supports as well, plus the flexibility and customization support that Theia as itself provides. So you can really pull in random, not randomly, but at your will, any additional language support from the IDE world and combine this with a very domain-specific functionality that you have added on top of Theia. So just to show you this super quickly, in this coffee editor example application, we can actually also generate code. So I can click here and generate some workflow code, which will then interpret this model and generate some Java code. And what's really nice here is that by just including existing language servers, in this case, the language server for Java, which is again based on an Eclipse project, Eclipse GLSP, you have here excellent full language support for Java at your fingertips, essentially. So you can write Java code as you would expect. Hello Theia con, for instance. We can now save this, and you can now even run this Java code and debug it within the Theia application. So there is automatically generated also a test runner, which we can which will essentially run every task that in the same order as defined in this model. That's not too important, but we can actually set a breakpoint here and debug this. And then we will see that now it's compiling the Java program down here. And in a second or so, it will start the program and will stop wherever I added a debug breakpoint. And then you have all the features that you would expect from a full-fledged IDE with stepping into, stepping over. So let's just step into for fun and step over a few times. You can analyze the threads that are running, the local variables and stuff like that. And then just continue. And if I have saved everything and everything would have worked, I guess there should be somewhere a system out with hello Eclipse, hello TheaCon. I don't see it right now. Anyway, I guess it will be there somewhere. Right. So with that, I think I covered most of what I wanted to mention. So just to conclude, so high-end web-based tools is really not a dream of the future anymore. We've been working in several different projects with customers to build Theia-based applications, and I think this whole Theia ecosystem really made it much easier and more efficient to build such high-end web-based tools. There are many adopters already and a very active ecosystem, which is really great. So there's a lot of movement and a lot of new features coming in essentially every month. And what's really, I think, a key success factor is that you can combine this full flexibility for custom IDEs, configurators, and tools that Theia provides with this full ecosystem of very different things, ranging from IDE aspects like coding, debugging, to analyzing traces, which Matthew, I think, will talk in the next slot about. And you can combine, pick and choose all of that and customize it into your domain-specific workflow. So how to get started? It's rather, I would really suggest to start building a proof of concept application for your particular requirements. There is great starting points out there. There is the Theia Blueprint project, which is essentially, as the name implies, a blueprint for starting a custom IDE. So you can start from there and adapt it to your needs. And for more this configuration and modeling tool types of applications, there is the Coffee Editor blueprint that I've just shown before. It's also available open source, so you can start from there and look around the code how things are implemented. Also, it's worth mentioning that there is currently a lot of drive for the C++ world in the whole Theia community, in particular in the ECD working group. There is a special interest group which works on many different aspects about C++ editing. So there might be even a blueprint for C++ editing tools available in the future. Right, and with that, I would really like to thank you all for joining this talk. It was great fun to be here. I will stick around for sure to watch the other talks right after this one. And I would also really like to invite you to contact us for a virtual coffee. Of course, the coffee drinking is optional, but I really would be interested in your use cases that you think about when you plan to build your next Theia-based application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. So we have several questions that came in, so I'll jump right in so we can try and get to as many as possible. So first one, could the need for filters be eliminated or reduced if at Theia core were made leaner? And what might you move to a new not quite core package?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So I think it's a little bit related to the question that came up also during the talk before from Thomas. So I think, yes, it could be done that by re-architecting the dependency of Theia to get rid of many contributions, or at least UI contributions that come from the dependencies, essentially Monaco and so on. However, as Thomas also outlined, there is a little bit of a design decision that Monaco is considered to be a very core component and a core dependency. So there is many things actually that are used from the code base from Monaco, not only the text editor, even things like color management comes partly from the Monaco code base, and command palette support is very tied or linked to the Monaco implementation. So it would be a lot of work. And of course, it would be even better if we could just have a very minimal application by just having one dependency, and then we wouldn't have Monaco in. But the reality right now is that we have it in. And I think in many cases it also doesn't hurt because UI-wise you can remove it. And it's still handy for many use cases to have a very good text editor on board.
All right, so next question. How do you import and use custom web components, for example, a node library in a Theia extension? Does this have to be a web view?
Right, also great question. The answer is no, and that's the great thing. So if you're coming more from from the VS Code custom editor mechanism. The Theia mechanism, of course, supports the same thing as it supports the VS Code extension mechanism. So you can also use your custom editors that have been built the VS Code way in Theia. However, for very complex custom editors or views, you don't need to run inside of a web view. You can even sort of natively extend, for instance, the React base widget class, and then you directly implement it based on a React widget as any other core component and core UI in Theia itself. From my experience, at least, I've done both. I've dealt with both ways. It's much easier to build front-end extensions in Theia than the custom editors in VS Code because of this web view limitation.
Okay. About custom views, is using the new.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. Sorry, I lost you for a second. Could you repeat, please?
Relevant in a Theia-based application.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. Can you please repeat? Yeah, I can hear you well. It just was just a few seconds that I didn't catch. Yeah.
Yeah. About custom views, is using the new VS Code UI toolkit relevant in a Theia-based application?
I have to say I have not a lot of experience with that collected yet. I would say in most of the cases, I wouldn't say, but of course it depends a little bit. I would have to look more into the details of the UI toolkit that is now provided, but I think in most cases it wouldn't. But again, I haven't looked it up in detail yet. Are you still there? Brian, can you hear me? Not sure if it's just me, but I think I lost you. Anyway, if if you still hear me, then let me just say thank you very much again. And yeah, please feel free to contact us for any further questions. Thank you.